I never imagined that betrayal could come dressed in a suit and tie, holding a pen instead of a knife. The moment I walked into the notary's office, I thought I was signing routine papers for my utilities, something simple, something harmless. But then I saw it. The document spread neatly across the desk, stamped with official seals, and at the bottom of the page, a familiar signature that was supposed to be mine. My heart turned to ice. It wasn't mine. It was forged, and the title of the paper wasn't some utility form. It was a deed transfer. According to that paper, my only son had already sold my house. My house. The house where I had lived with my late husband for over 30 years. The house where every corner still held his memory. The house where my son had taken his first steps, cried through his first heartbreak, celebrated his graduations, and in a single sweep of a pen, he had sold it. Behind my back, without a single word to me. I remember gripping the arms of the chair so tightly, I thought they would snap. My son sat across the desk, cool as a businessman, nodding politely at the notary while avoiding my eyes. The woman next to him, his wife, rested her manicured hand on his arm and smiled with satisfaction, as if the universe had just handed her a prize she'd been scheming for. I couldn't speak, my throat locked. The notary cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly sensing the storm in the room, but trying to remain professional. Mrs. Hartman, you just need to confirm your approval. Approval? Of what? Of being robbed by my own blood? In that instant, something shattered inside me. I had always believed that no matter what, family was sacred. That my sacrifices, working double shifts after my husband died, selling my jewelry to pay my son's college tuition, giving up vacations and comforts to make sure he had everything, meant something. That all those nights crying silently in the kitchen, praying I was raising a decent man, had shaped him into someone honorable. But sitting there, watching him sell the very walls that had sheltered us, I realized I had raised a stranger. My voice finally broke through the lump in my throat. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew. My son shifted uncomfortably, like a child caught stealing candy, but his words were cold, rehearsed. "Mom, you don't need such a big place anymore. We found buyers. This is better for everyone. You'll thank us later." Thank them? For betraying me? For erasing my life behind my back? The world around me blurred. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I looked down at the fake signature, neat, almost perfect, but just a little off. I could see the hesitation in the curve of the letters, the slight tremor that wasn't mine. It was his, my son's. The boy who used to climb into my lap and draw scribbles with crayons. Now those hands were stealing the roof from over my head. I wanted to scream, to overturn the desk, to tear the paper into 1,000 pieces, but instead, I just stared at him. Because the real pain wasn't the house, wasn't the betrayal of property. It was the betrayal of love. If my own son could forge my name to sell my home, what else was he capable of? What else had I been blind to? His wife leaned closer, her perfume sharp and suffocating. "It's really the best thing, Renata," she said sweetly, using my name like a dagger. "You'll be so much more comfortable in a smaller apartment. Less responsibility, less stress. At your age, you should be thinking about rest, not ownership." At my age, the words burned. I was 71, yes, but my mind was clear, my body strong enough, my spirit sharper than she could ever imagine, and yet, in her mouth, I was already a burden, a problem to be solved. The notary looked at me, waiting for my approval. My hands trembled on my lap. I could see the entire room holding its breath. My son avoided my gaze, staring instead at the pen in front of him, the pen that had become a weapon. My entire life, my identity, reduced to ink on paper. And in that moment, a single thought screamed in my head. If your own blood betrays you, who can you trust? I felt tears sting the corners of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not in front of them, not in front of the people who wanted to see me weak. I closed the folder calmly, my voice steady in a way that even surprised me. "You've already sold the house," I said slowly, "but you have no idea what I sold first." Their faces twitched with confusion. His wife frowned. My son finally looked up, his eyes searching mine for the first time all morning. But I gave them nothing more. I stood, lifted my purse, and left the office with the sound of my heels echoing like gunshots on the marble floor. Outside, the cold wind hit my face, and I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. They thought they had taken everything from me. They thought they had cornered me into silence. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly suspect, was that the game had already shifted. They believed they had stolen my house. They believed they had sold my future. But I had already sold something far more important, something that would take their entire world apart when the truth surfaced. I paused on the sidewalk, cars rushing past, people hurrying by with no idea of the war raging inside me. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, almost like a vow, "They sold my house, but I sold their life." And this is the story of how betrayal became the fire that remade me, how a mother turned into something her son never expected. So I ask you, if your only child forged your name and sold the walls of your life, would you stay silent or would you rise? Because I already know my answer. When I left the notary's office that day, the air felt heavier than lead. The city around me went on as if nothing had happened. People laughing at cafe tables, children tugging their parents' sleeves, street vendors calling out their offers. But in my chest, there was only silence, the kind that follows an explosion. I walked home like a ghost, barely aware of the pavement under my feet. My son had forged my name. My son had sold my house. The words repeated in my head like a drumbeat, a cruel rhythm I could not escape. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room with only the faint hum of the refrigerator for company. The sofa beneath me felt foreign, as though it already belonged to someone else. Every corner of the house seemed to whisper my husband's name, Robert, as if he were still here, watching over me. For 30 years, we had built this place together, painted the walls with our own hands, planted the roses in the garden, filled the rooms with laughter and arguments and forgiveness. And now, with a single piece of paper, our son had tried to erase it all. At dawn, I made coffee, though it tasted like ash in my mouth. I told myself I needed to think, to gather evidence, to stay calm. But calm was impossible when betrayal seeped through the walls like smoke. I was rinsing my cup when I heard a sound in the hallway. My son and his wife had come early. They didn't know I was in the kitchen. I froze, listening. Her voice was the first thing I heard. Sweet, sharp, triumphant. "It's done. She doesn't even understand. The papers are already moving. Soon this house is ours." Ours. The word hit me like a slap. I pressed my back against the cold wall and held my breath, straining to hear more. My son's voice followed, low and hesitant. I don't want her to get too upset. She's still my mom." "Your mom?" She laughed. A cruel little sound that sliced through the quiet. "Your mom is living in the past. You and I are the future. Stop feeling guilty. Think of the debt we can pay, the car we can finally buy. This is our chance. And she'll thank us later when she's in a smaller place and we're finally free." The words twisted my stomach. Debt, car, freedom, my sacrifice, my roof, my memories, reduced to coins in their pockets. My knees trembled, and I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep from falling. My son murmured something I couldn't catch, but she hushed him quickly, her heels clicking down the hall as they left the apartment. I stayed frozen, staring at the floor tiles, the faint morning light painting stripes across them. I remembered the night I first brought him home from the hospital, wrapped in a blue blanket, so tiny I was afraid I might break him. Robert had cried when he held him, whispering, "He's our future, Renata. He'll carry us forward." And now that same boy was selling the roof over my head for his debts. I sank into the chair, clutching my chest, fighting the tears. How had we come to this? Had I loved him too much? Had I made life too easy, protecting him from every hardship until he no longer saw me as a person, only as an endless resource? The thought gnawed at me like a rat in the dark. Later that day, I called my sister Diana. I tried to sound calm, but my voice cracked. "Diana, something terrible is happening. Max. He signed papers to sell my house." She gasped on the other end. "What? Without your consent? That's impossible." "It's not. He forged my signature, and Lena, she's proud of it." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Diana's voice, low and steady. "Renata, you need to be very careful. This isn't just selfishness. This is premeditated. They could try to declare you incompetent. I've seen this happen before. You need a lawyer. And you need proof." Her words steadied me, like a hand pulling me back from a cliff. Proof, yes. If they wanted to play with signatures and lies, then I would build my own case. I hung up and went straight to my desk. I pulled out every document, every bank statement, every letter I had kept over the years. My hands shook as I spread them across the table, but inside me a small spark began to flicker. That evening, I heard voices outside. I peeked through the curtain and saw a man in a sleek suit pointing at my house, gesturing at the garden, the windows, a real estate agent. And next to him, my daughter-in-law, smiling as though she already owned it. My heart slammed against my ribs. She was giving a tour of my home while I was still inside it. I pulled back, pressing myself against the wall, trembling with rage. I wanted to storm out and throw them both into the street, but I stayed hidden, listening as she said, "Yes, the owner is old, but don't worry, everything will be finalized soon. It's basically ours already." Old, basically theirs. I bit my lip until it bled. When they finally left, I collapsed into the armchair, shaking. That was when the memories flooded back, uninvited. Robert. Painting the nursery yellow because we didn't know if Max would be a boy or a girl. Robert kneeling in the dirt with Max, teaching him how to plant a tree. Robert coughing in the hospital bed, gripping my hand and whispering, "Take care of him, Renata. Promise me." And I had promised. I had promised with every fiber of my being. But now, I asked myself, what does taking care mean? Does it mean feeding his greed until nothing of me is left? Does it mean giving up the home where my husband's voice still lingers in the walls? Or does it mean protecting him from his own corruption, even if that means fighting him? I didn't have the answer yet. All I knew was that the ground beneath me was crumbling, and I had to move fast before I lost everything. The phone rang that night, jolting me from my thoughts. It was Max. His voice was casual, as though nothing had happened. "Hey, Mom, just checking if you're okay. I know things are stressful." Stressful. The word made me want to scream, but I forced my tone flat. "I saw the papers, Max." There was a pause. Then his voice tightened. "Mom, listen. It's better this way. You don't need all that space. You'll see. It's just business." Business? I spat the word like poison. This isn't business. This is betrayal. His sigh was heavy, annoyed. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Lena and I are handling things. Just trust us." Trust. That word was dead between us. I hung up without another word, my hands shaking. That night, I sat at the table staring at the stack of documents, the photographs, the memories. For years, I had carried the weight of being the good mother, the forgiving mother, the one who always said yes. But something inside me shifted as I listened to the silence of the house, as I imagined strangers walking these halls, tearing down the wallpaper, erasing Robert's laughter from the air. I realized I was done being silent. I looked at the deed again, at the fake signature that bore my son's hand. My tears blurred the ink, but when I blinked them away, what I saw was no longer weakness. It was fuel, proof. The first brick in a wall I would build against them. They thought they had won, but they had no idea who they were up against. I closed the folder and whispered into the empty room, "You sold my house, Max. But you have no idea what I'm about to do." The following morning, I opened my curtains to a gray sky that seemed to mirror the heaviness in my chest. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours, every creak of the house making me sit up, afraid they had already sent strangers to claim what wasn't theirs. I told myself I was paranoid, but deep down I knew it was only a matter of time. They had signed my name once. They could just as easily break down my door. Around noon, there was a knock. When I opened it, my neighbor Mrs. Lang stood there, her face pale, her hands clutching the strap of her purse. "Renata," she said softly, "I don't know if I should tell you this, but yesterday evening I saw a man and a woman outside your fence. They were with your daughter-in-law." My blood turned to ice. What were they doing? "They were pointing at your garden, the windows, the roof. I heard the man say, 'This place will be easy to flip.' Your daughter-in-law laughed and said, 'Don't worry, the old woman will be out soon.'" The words sliced through me like glass. Old woman. Out soon. I had lived here for decades, paid every bill, painted every wall, carried my husband's coffin through that front door, and now I was reduced to an obstacle. Mrs. Lang touched my arm gently. "I thought you should know. I didn't want you to be caught by surprise." I thanked her, though my voice trembled so badly it hardly sounded like mine. After she left, I locked the door, sat at the kitchen table, and buried my face in my hands. The humiliation burned deeper than anger. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about dignity. They wanted me erased. As I sat there, my eyes landed on an old photo frame propped on the shelf. It was Max, 10 years old, grinning with 2 missing teeth, holding a trophy from his first soccer game. Robert stood behind him, his arm on our son's shoulder, pride shining in his eyes. I remembered the way Robert had lifted Max onto his shoulders that day, carrying him around the field while I clapped until my hands stung. That boy had once looked at me like I was his whole world. How did that boy grow into the man who forged my name? The memory hurt, but it also sharpened something inside me. Maybe I had been blind for too long, smothering him with protection, never letting him face consequences. Maybe this was my fault. But if it was, then I was the only one who could fix it. Later that afternoon, Max came by, alone. He didn't look at me when he entered. Just walked straight into the living room and sat down as if the house already belonged to him. His eyes darted around the room, calculating. "Mom," he began, his tone rehearsed, "we should talk about moving forward." "Moving forward?" I repeated, the bitterness sharp in my throat. "Moving forward from what? From you stealing my home?" His jaw tightened. "It's not stealing. It's practical. You don't need this house. You could live somewhere smaller, safer. We'll handle the details. You just need to cooperate." "Cooperate?" My voice rose despite my effort to stay calm. "Cooperate with betrayal? With my own son selling the roof over my head?" He sighed, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Please don't be dramatic. This is what families do. We look out for each other." Families. I almost laughed. If families look out for each other, why did I find out about the sale in a notary's office instead of from my own son's lips? Why did my neighbor have to warn me about strangers touring my garden? I leaned forward, my voice low, dangerous. "Who are you really looking out for, Max? Me or your debts?" For the first time, his composure cracked. He looked away, and I knew I had struck the truth. "Lena told me," I said coldly. "You need the money to pay what you owe, and I'm supposed to be the sacrifice." His head snapped toward me, anger flashing in his eyes. "You don't understand. You've never had to deal with this kind of pressure. Lena and I are drowning. This house is the only chance we have." I stared at him, feeling something inside me harden. "So you'd rather see me on the street than face your mistakes like a man?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, ashamed, lost. But the moment passed, replaced by the cold adult who saw me as a means to an end. That night, I wrote everything down. Every word I overheard, every detail Mrs. Lang gave me, every phrase Max had spoken. My notes grew into pages, a record of betrayal I would one day need. Days passed and the tension grew thicker. At family gatherings, Lena barely disguised her arrogance. She dropped comments like poisoned honey. "Renata, don't you get lonely rattling around in that big house? Wouldn't it be better to live somewhere more appropriate for your age?" I clenched my teeth, smiled tightly, and said nothing. But inside, I burned. Appropriate for my age. They were circling me like vultures, trying to convince everyone I was weak, incompetent, ready to be put aside. I began to notice the looks from relatives, the way some of them avoided my eyes as if they'd already heard Lena's whispers. She's confused. She's stubborn. She doesn't know what's best for herself. Lies. But lies, when repeated enough, can become truth in the mouths of the careless. One evening, I returned home to find a flyer slipped under my door. A retirement residence advertisement. Elegant, polished, with smiling seniors playing cards in sunlit rooms. At the bottom, in handwriting I recognized too well, were the words, "Think about it. Love, Lena." My hands shook so violently I nearly tore the paper apart. She wanted me gone. Not just gone. Contained, silenced, stripped of my home, my independence, my identity. That night, as I sat staring at the fireplace, I remembered another moment long ago. Max had been 13, angry because I couldn't afford the expensive sneakers all his friends had. He had shouted, "You don't care about me, you're ruining my life." I had run to my bedroom, cried into my pillow, and then scraped together money from my grocery budget to buy those shoes. When he saw them, he hugged me and said, "You're the best mom in the world." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. But looking back now, I saw it for what it was, the beginning of a pattern. Every time he wanted something, I bent. Every time he pushed, I gave. And now the demand wasn't sneakers. It was my life. The pressure around me grew unbearable. Relatives began calling, their voices dripping with false concern. "Renata, dear, maybe it would be easier for you in a smaller place. Don't be so stubborn." I knew whose voice was behind them. Lena's poison had spread. At church, people glanced at me with pity, as if I were already half gone, a senile old woman clinging to bricks and mortar. I felt the walls closing in, the whispers multiplying. I was being painted into a corner, but in that corner, something inside me stirred. Anger, sharp and clear. For years I had been quiet, gentle, patient, but they had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They thought they could push me until I crumbled. They forgot that I was the woman who had buried a husband and still raised a son alone, who had worked until her bones ached to keep a roof overhead, who had endured humiliation and heartbreak and still stood tall. I wasn't going to crumble. Not this time. I looked around my living room, at the photos on the wall, at Robert's armchair still sitting by the window, at the table where I had celebrated birthdays and Christmases. They wanted to erase me from this house, but they didn't realize this house was already more than walls. It was my battlefield. I whispered into the empty room, my voice steady. "You think I'm weak. You think I'll surrender. But you're wrong. You're about to learn who I really am." It was only a matter of weeks before the whispers became storms. At first, it was subtle. An aunt who avoided my calls, a cousin who changed the subject whenever my name came up. But then it turned direct, sharp, undeniable. My phone began buzzing at odd hours, voices of relatives dripping with concern that felt more like accusation than care. "Renata, sweetheart," my cousin Angela said one night, her tone soft but edged with judgment. "We're all worried about you. Lena says you've been confused lately, forgetting things. Maybe this house is too much for you." I gripped the receiver so tightly, my knuckles turned white. Confused? Forgetting? Angela, I've balanced my accounts down to the cent every month. I've never once missed a payment. Yes, but... She hesitated. Sometimes older people don't realize when they're slipping. We just want the best for you. The best. Those words tasted like poison now. Another call came from my nephew. Aunt Renata, please don't be stubborn. Selling the house will give you peace. Isn't that what you want? I slammed the phone down before he could finish. I stood in the hallway trembling, my own reflection in the mirror looking back at me like a stranger. They had turned the family against me. Every whisper Lena had spread was now coming back through the mouths of those who should have defended me. The worst came on Sunday at church. I had gone there for comfort, for the solace of routine. But when I walked through the doors, I felt the weight of dozens of eyes on me. Some were pitying, some curious, others downright judgmental. After the service, the pastor approached me gently. Renata, I heard you've been under a lot of stress. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. Stress, always that word. Stress, confusion, stubbornness. They were weaving a net around me, one strand at a time, until soon they could pull it tight and declare me incapable. I could see it clearly. Their plan wasn't just to steal my house. They wanted to strip me of my independence, to put my life into their hands like I was a child again. That night, I couldn't hold back the tears. I sat at the kitchen table, head in my arms, the silence of the house pressing down on me. Robert, I whispered into the emptiness, I don't know how much longer I can fight. Our son, our own son, is tearing me apart. I imagined his voice, steady and kind. Renata, you are stronger than you think. Don't let them bury you alive. The next morning, I made a decision. I gathered my notes, my documents, every scrap of evidence I had collected, and I walked into the office of a lawyer I had once met through a friend. His name was Mr. Weber, a man with sharp eyes and a steady presence. I sat across from him, my hands trembling as I slid the papers across the desk. They forged my signature, I said, my voice breaking. My son, he sold my house without me. And now they're telling everyone I'm confused, that I can't make decisions anymore. I know what they're trying to do. They want to take everything. Mr. Weber leaned back, scanning the documents, his expression hardening. Mrs. Hartman, what you're describing isn't just betrayal, it's financial abuse. And if they're spreading lies about your mental state, they could be preparing to petition for guardianship. The word struck me like a blow. Guardianship. It meant they could legally strip me of control, take my bank accounts, my decisions, even the right to live in my own home. What can I do? I whispered. He folded his hands. First, you need to secure your assets. Make sure they can't access your accounts. Second, document everything. Every call, every insult, every forged paper. And third, prepare yourself. This may go to court. Court. The idea terrified me. Facing my own son and his wife in a public battle, airing our wounds before strangers. But I knew he was right. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about my freedom. When I left his office, the sky had darkened, clouds heavy with rain. It felt fitting, as if the heavens themselves were bracing for the storm ahead. The pressure intensified that very evening. Max came over with Lena, their expressions rehearsed. They sat me down like an intervention. "Mom," Max began, his tone falsely calm. "We've been talking. You've been very stressed lately, forgetting things, not answering calls. We think it's time you considered professional help." Professional help. I almost laughed in his face, but my heart hammered too violently. I looked at him, my own flesh and blood, and saw not concern, but calculation in his eyes. "I am not confused," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "I am not sick. The only sickness here is your greed." Lena leaned forward, her smile saccharine. "Renata, please don't be so defensive. We love you. We just want what's best." I stood abruptly, pointing to the door. "Get out, both of you. This is still my house." Max's face darkened, the mask slipping. "Not for long." The door slammed behind them, leaving me shaking with fury and fear. For hours I paced the house, the walls closing in. They were tightening their grip. The neighbors, the relatives, the church. Everywhere I turned, the whispers grew louder. One night I woke to the sound of voices outside. I crept to the window and saw them again, Lena with another couple pointing at the house, her hands sweeping like a saleswoman. I clenched my fists, biting back a scream. They were selling my life piece by piece while I still slept inside it. The isolation gnawed at me. Friends stopped calling, unsure what to believe. My own family treated me like a fragile old woman losing her mind. I began to doubt myself. Had I made a mistake? Had I misread things? But then I looked at the forged signature again, the fake ink pretending to be me, and the doubt turned back to fire. I knew I had to protect myself. I went to the bank, canceled every automatic transfer, blocked access to my accounts. The clerk looked at me with concern. "Mrs. Hartman, are you sure? These transfers have been regular for years." "I'm sure," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I've opened my eyes." Walking out of the bank, I felt lighter, but the phone calls didn't stop. Max, Lena, unknown numbers. They rang like alarms, each one demanding, accusing, manipulating. I stopped answering. Let the silence answer for me. Still, at night the fear crept in. What if they forced me out? What if they brought papers, police, lawyers? What if they succeeded in painting me as insane? I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, hearing Robert's voice in my memory. "You're stronger than you think." One night, unable to stand the silence, I took a walk. I passed the park where I used to push Max on the swings, his laughter ringing through the air. I remembered how he would run back to me, arms wide, shouting, "Mom, catch me!" And I always did, always. That memory stabbed at me now. I had caught him every time. But who would catch me now that he had turned away? I sat on a bench, the cold seeping through my coat, tears rolling silently down my cheeks. I realized then the true cruelty of betrayal. It isn't the loss of money or even of property. It's the loss of the illusion that love was enough. When I returned home, I made another vow. If they wanted to take me down, they would have to drag me through fire. I would not go quietly into the cage they were building. The following week, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from a law firm. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a notice. A petition for financial guardianship had been drafted. They hadn't filed it yet, but they were preparing. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. They were serious. They were coming for me. I clutched the paper, my chest heaving. For a moment, despair threatened to crush me. But then, somewhere deep inside, a spark flared. If they wanted war, they would have it. I called Mr. Weber immediately. His voice was steady, reassuring. "We'll fight this, Mrs. Hartman. They underestimate you. We'll gather evidence, witnesses, proof of your competence. They think you're weak. Let's show them otherwise." When I hung up, I walked to the mirror in my bedroom. My reflection looked back, wrinkled, tired, but not broken. My eyes were still sharp, still alive. I wiped my tears and whispered, "You think you can erase me, but you don't know who I really am. You're about to learn." The day it all came crashing down began like any other. I had just finished making coffee when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside my house. At first, I thought it was the mailman, but then I saw them, Max's car, Lena's shiny sedan, and another vehicle I didn't recognize, sleek and black with tinted windows. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a visit. This was an invasion. The doorbell rang once, sharp and commanding, followed by the rattling of keys. My keys. They still had copies. Before I could reach the door, it swung open, and there they were. Max, his face set in grim determination. Lena, smirking like a queen surveying her conquered land, and a man in a gray suit with a leather briefcase, his expression smooth, professional, deadly. "Mom," Max said, his tone rehearsed, "we need to talk." I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching my mug like a shield. "You could have called." "You don't answer," he shot back. His eyes flicked to Lena, who glided past me without permission, her perfume filling the air like poison. She sat on the couch, crossed her legs, and gestured for the man in the suit to sit beside her. The stranger opened his briefcase and began pulling out documents, arranging them neatly on my dining table as though this were his office. "Mrs. Hartman," he said smoothly, "I'm Mr. Fisher, representing your son and daughter-in-law. We'd like to clarify the next steps regarding your housing situation." Housing situation. The words almost made me laugh. This was my home, my sanctuary, and they were discussing it like a rental contract. "What situation?" I demanded. "This is my house." Mr. Fisher's smile was thin. "Not for much longer. The property has already been negotiated for sale. You will have 30 days to vacate." My mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor, coffee splattering across the tiles like blood. 30 days. They were evicting me from my own home. I looked at Max, my son, the boy I had raised alone after Robert died. His eyes avoided mine, glued instead to the papers in front of him. I searched his face for guilt, for hesitation, for anything that might remind me of the child who once begged me to read him bedtime stories. But all I saw was fear, not of losing me, but of losing money. "Max," I whispered, my voice cracking, "how could you do this to me?" His jaw clenched. "Mom, please don't make this harder. It's better this way. You can't handle this place anymore. Lena and I will take care of things. Take care of things." He said it like I was a broken lamp, an outdated piece of furniture that needed replacing. My knees trembled, and I stumbled back into a chair. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the floor. The room spun, the air thick and suffocating. Lena's voice cut through the fog. "Renata, don't be so dramatic. You'll thank us later. Think of it as freedom. No more responsibilities, no more stress." Her words dripped with condescension, but her eyes betrayed her, hungry, gleaming with victory. She thought she had won. Mr. Fisher slid the papers toward me. "If you just sign here, we can make the transition smoother. Otherwise, legal proceedings will be necessary." The pen glinted on the table like a weapon. I stared at it, my chest heaving. Everything in me screamed to grab it, to stab it through their lies, to shred the papers into dust. But my hands stayed still. I thought of Robert's voice again, the promise I had made at his deathbed. Take care of Max. I had done that. For 35 years, I had taken care of him. But now, taking care meant something else. It meant protecting him from his own greed, even if he hated me for it. My eyes fell on the album of family photos sitting on the shelf. Max as a baby in Robert's arms, Max at his graduation, my proud smile shining brighter than his, Max on his wedding day before Lena's shadow darkened everything. Every memory twisted now, poisoned by this moment. Tears blurred my vision, but beneath them, something hardened. They thought they had me cornered, broken. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know the secret I had kept hidden, the move I had made months ago when I first sensed their greed taking shape. I wiped my eyes and straightened in the chair. My voice, when it came, was calm, steady. "You think this house is yours to sell?" Lena's smirk widened. "It already is." I leaned forward, my gaze slicing into hers. "You're wrong." Confusion flickered across her face, then annoyance. "Don't start with your games, Renata." But it wasn't a game. Deep inside, I felt the weight of the papers locked in my safe upstairs. The documents that proved the house wasn't mine anymore. Not legally, not on any ledger they could manipulate. Months ago, I had transferred it quietly to a foundation that protects elderly people from financial abuse. I had done it as an act of caution, never imagining I would one day need it to shield myself from my own son. The irony burned. They thought they had trapped me, but the walls they were tearing down had already been removed from their grasp. I didn't reveal it then, not yet. The time wasn't right. Instead, I stood, my voice cutting through the room like glass. "Get out of my house!" Max finally looked at me, anger blazing. "Mom, stop this. We're trying to help you. Don't you see? You're not thinking clearly." "Not thinking clearly?" I laughed, the sound raw, bitter. "I see more clearly now than ever, and what I see are two vultures picking at their own family." Mr. E.D.R. Fisher began gathering the papers, his composure slipping just enough to reveal irritation. "Mrs. Hartman, I must advise you that refusing to cooperate will only make things more difficult." I pointed to the door. "More difficult for whom? Because I assure you, Mr. Fisher, this isn't over, and when it ends, you'll wish you had never stepped foot in my house." For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Then Lena scoffed, rising from the couch. "You'll regret this, Renata. We're not backing down." "Neither am I," I replied coldly. They left, the door slamming so hard the walls shook. I stood in the silence, my chest heaving, the shattered mug still on the floor. My whole body trembled, not from fear anymore, but from fury. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, the papers from the safe spread out before me. The transfer documents glowed under the lamplight, proof of my foresight. They thought they had stolen my home, but they had been too late. The house no longer belonged to me, it belonged to justice itself. I traced my finger over Robert's photo on the nightstand. "You were right," I whispered. "Visible wealth attracts problems. Invisible wealth gives power." For years, I had hidden my strength behind modesty, letting the world think I was weaker than I was. But now, I saw the wisdom in Robert's words. I had power, and I was about to use it. The next morning, I called Mr. Weber, my lawyer. My voice was steady, clear. "They came to the house. They gave me 30 days. "Don't worry," he replied. "We'll make sure 30 days is never enough for them." As I hung up, I felt something shift inside me. The fear that had haunted me for weeks began to dissolve, replaced by a colder, sharper determination. They wanted war. They were about to get it. I stood at the window, watching the sunrise paint the sky in streaks of fire. The light spilled across the garden Robert and I had planted, across the roses blooming stubbornly despite the season. This house had been our sanctuary, our story. They thought they could erase that with signatures and threats. They were wrong. "They don't know yet," I whispered to the glass. "But the game has already changed. They think I've lost, but I've already won." The morning after their invasion, I didn't feel like the same woman anymore. I woke before dawn, sitting at the edge of my bed with the papers still spread across the blanket, proof of the move I had made long before they thought to strike. The house they were circling like vultures was no longer mine to lose, and they had no idea. For weeks, I had been trapped in fear, suffocating under whispers and threats. But now I felt something shift. The fear was still there, but beneath it ran a current of steel. I brewed my coffee slowly, savoring the silence, the way the bitter steam curled upward in the dim light. For the first time in months, I wasn't rushing to defend myself. I was planning. At 9 sharp, I walked into Mr. Weber's office with my folder tucked tightly under my arm. He rose when he saw me, his sharp eyes softening just slightly. "Mrs. Hartman," he said, "I've been expecting you." I placed the documents on his desk with a firmness that surprised even me. They think they've won, but they don't know this house isn't even mine anymore. I transferred it to a foundation months ago. Every brick they've tried to sell belongs to justice now, not to them. He examined the papers carefully, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Brilliant," You've outmaneuvered them without even realizing it. These documents make their entire plan crumble before it begins." Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by another, sharper thought. "They won't stop, will they?" He shook his head. "No, greed rarely retreats. They'll escalate. They may still push for guardianship, try to claim you're incompetent. But now, you hold the upper hand. We'll use this transfer as proof not only of your clarity, but of your foresight." For the first time, I exhaled without shaking. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I had a weapon. When I returned home, I found Mrs. Lang, my neighbor, waiting on my porch with a small basket of cookies. She looked nervous, almost guilty. "Renata," I didn't want to intrude, but I heard them again last night. Lena was talking to someone on the phone in the driveway. She said, "Don't worry, once we prove she's confused, the rest will be easy." I closed my eyes, breathing slowly. "Thank you for telling me." She hesitated, then touched my arm. "If you need me to speak on your behalf, I will. I've seen you manage your house, your bills, your garden. You're sharper than half the young people on this street. If they're saying otherwise, they're lying." Her words lit a spark in me. I wasn't alone. I had an ally right across the fence. That evening, my sister Diana called from Chicago. I told her everything: the forged signature, the invasion, the documents in my safe. She was silent for a long time, then said, "Renata, I'm flying down. You shouldn't go through this alone." "No," I replied firmly. "I don't want you to be dragged into this mess. But will you testify for me if it comes to that?" "Of course. I'll stand by you until the end. They've underestimated you, sister. That's their first mistake." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house, the walls no longer closing in, but echoing with possibilities. I realized something profound. For years, I had bent under Max's demands, mistaking submission for love, mistaking sacrifice for care. But now, for the first time, I wasn't bending. I was standing, and it felt like breathing after years underwater. Over the next days, I began to prepare like a soldier before battle. I kept a journal of every incident, every call, every insult. I filed copies of bank statements and utility bills, showing my perfect track record. I asked the pharmacist for records of my prescriptions, only vitamins and the occasional aspirin. I documented the garden I tended myself, the groceries I bought, the car I drove. Piece by piece, I built a portrait not of an old woman slipping into confusion, but of a woman very much alive, competent, and ready to fight. Max and Lena continued their attempts. The phone calls grew more desperate, alternating between sweet promises and sharp threats. "Mom, we just want to help." "Renata, you're being stubborn. If you don't cooperate, it will get worse for you." Each word that once pierced me now only fueled my resolve. I no longer cried after the calls. I wrote them down, word for word, evidence for the battle to come. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with fire, I sat on the porch with Mrs. Lang. She handed me a cup of tea, her hand steady. "Do you know what I admire most about you, Renata? You're not giving up. Most people would crumble under this kind of pressure, but you're fighting." I sipped the tea, the warmth seeping into me. "I don't feel brave," I admitted. "I feel tired, betrayed. But maybe fighting is all that's left." She smiled sadly. Sometimes that's what bravery really is. That night, as I locked the front door, I paused in the hallway. The house was silent, but it no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a fortress. They wanted to drive me out. Instead, they had forced me to claim it more fiercely than ever. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and whispered to Robert, "I'm not done yet. They think I'm broken, but I'm only just beginning." The turning point had arrived. I was no longer a mother begging for scraps of affection, no longer a woman trembling at the thought of eviction. I was something new, something sharper, forged in the fire of betrayal. And as I drifted into sleep, I realized the truth. The storm wasn't coming. The storm was already here, and this time I was ready to wield the lightning. The confrontation I had been dreading came on a Wednesday evening when the sun had already dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the living room floor. I was sitting at the table with my papers spread neatly before me, rehearsing in my mind the questions I knew lawyers would throw at me when I heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. My chest tightened. I had changed the locks a week earlier, but Max still had a way in. The door opened, and there he was. My son. No wife at his side this time. Just Max, 35 years old and looking more like a cornered animal than the boy I once raised. His eyes darted around the room, then landed on me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Mom," he finally said, his voice heavy, "we need to stop this madness." I didn't rise. I didn't flinch. I let the silence stretch until it forced him to keep talking. "You're making things worse for yourself," he continued, stepping closer. "Lena's furious. The lawyer is ready to move. If you just sign, if you just let this go, everything will be easier. You don't want to drag this through court. It'll destroy us all." "Destroy us all?" I said quietly, my fingers brushing the edge of Robert's photograph on the table. "You already destroyed me, Max. The day you forged my name, the day you sold my house without asking, you ended the U.S. we once had." His jaw tightened, but he pressed on. "I had no choice. We're drowning. You don't understand the pressure, don't I?" I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. "I raised you alone after your father died. I worked double shifts, sold my jewelry, ate beans and rice while you went to college. I've lived with pressure every day of my life. Don't you dare tell me I don't understand." He flinched, his eyes flicking to the floor. For a moment, I thought I saw the boy he used to be, ashamed, fragile. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating man Lena had shaped him into. "You're being unreasonable," he said, almost spitting the word. "This house is too much for you. You're not thinking clearly anymore." I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter in the quiet room. "Not thinking clearly? Look around you, Max. Every bill paid on time, every repair scheduled. My accounts balanced to the cent. I'm clearer now than I've ever been. The only one clouded here is you. Clouded by greed, by Lena's whispers, by your own fear of standing on your feet without me holding you up." His face twisted with anger. "You're going to regret this. If you fight us, we'll take everything. You'll end up alone, penniless, forgotten." I stood then slowly, deliberately, so we were eye to eye. "I've been alone for years, Max. Alone every time you only called to ask for money. Alone every time you and Lena made decisions behind my back. Alone when you cut me out of your wedding. Don't threaten me with loneliness. It's already my companion." His breath quickened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "Why are you doing this? We're your family." I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than any shout. "Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't forge signatures and call their mother confused. Whatever you are now, Max, it isn't family." For a moment, he looked at me like he wanted to argue, to scream, to reach back through time to the bond we once had, but he didn't. His face hardened, and he turned toward the door. "This isn't over," he said flatly. "No," I replied, my voice steady, unshaken. "It's only just beginning." The door slammed behind him, rattling the walls. I stood in the silence, my heart pounding, my hands trembling slightly, but not with fear, with fury, with resolve. That was the last private confrontation I would allow. The next time, it would be in the open, where lies shrivel under the light of truth. I gathered my papers back into the folder, pressing my palm against Robert's photo once more. "I'm ready," I whispered. "They wanted a war. Now they'll get one." The courthouse smelled of polished wood and tension. I walked in with my lawyer, Mr. Weber, my heart pounding so loudly I thought the whole building could hear it. My black suit felt like armor, my folder of documents a shield. On the other side of the room, Max sat beside Lena, both dressed in their best as if this were some twisted celebration. He wouldn't meet my eyes. She did. Cold, triumphant, convinced she was about to win. The judge, a stern man with silver hair and sharp glasses, called us to order. Max's attorney, the smooth Mr. Fisher, stood first. His words slid through the air like oil. "Your Honor, we are here today because Mrs. Hartman has shown alarming decline in judgment. She has isolated herself, cut off contact with her loving family, and made reckless financial decisions that put her well-being at risk. My clients only want to protect her as any devoted children would." I almost laughed out loud. Loving family, protection, lies dressed in silk. Then it was Mr. Weber's turn. He rose slowly, his presence calm but commanding. "Your Honor, what we have here is not an elderly woman losing her grip on reality. What we have is a clear case of financial abuse, orchestrated by a son and daughter-in-law who see Mrs. Hartman not as family, but as a bank account. We intend to prove that she is fully competent and that their motivations are rooted not in love, but in greed." The judge nodded, and the parade of witnesses began. First came Lena, taking the stand with a tissue all ready in her hand. Her voice trembled with rehearsed sorrow. "Renata has changed so much. She forgets things. She lashes out. We're only trying to help her transition to a safer place. She's like a second mother to me." Mr. Weber's cross-examination cut her facade to pieces. "Mrs. Hartman, when was the last time you called my client without asking her for money?" She stammered. "Isn't it true that you and your husband excluded her from your wedding?" Her cheeks flushed. "Didn't you once tell her she wasn't a special person?" Silence. Next was Max. Watching him swear an oath to tell the truth felt like swallowing glass. He spoke of my supposed confusion, my supposed paranoia. "She's not herself anymore," he insisted. "We're scared she'll be taken advantage of." Mr. Weber's questions landed like hammers. "Mr. Hartman, how much money have you received from your mother in the last 3 years?" Max shifted. I don't know the exact number. Would $33,400 sound about right?" Silence. "And how many times have you visited her without asking for financial assistance?" Silence again, thicker this time. The courtroom grew restless. I could feel the tide turning. Then Mr. Fisher called a neighbor, Mr. Davis, who spoke of seeing me install cameras, of me shouting in the street. He painted me as paranoid, unstable. But under questioning, he admitted he'd never once spoken to me directly, that his entire impression was based on surface observations. The cracks in their case grew wider. Finally, it was my turn. I walked to the stand, my legs steady, my hands gripping the folder like a lifeline. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down facing the judge, the lawyers, and my own son. Mr. Weber began gently, guiding me through my testimony. I told the story in my own words, the forged signature, the neighbors who saw strangers touring my home, the whispers of incompetence, the $33,400 I had given over the years in rent, gifts, emergencies. I told them how I had been excluded from the wedding, how Lena's words, "only special people," had broken me. My voice trembled at times, but it never faltered. Then Mr. Weber asked the question that mattered most. "Mrs. Hartman, why did you finally decide to stop financial support for your son and daughter-in-law?" I looked directly at Max, because I realized what they were giving me wasn't love. It was a transaction. My money was welcome. I was not, and I will no longer pay to be tolerated. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I saw Max's face redden, Lena's lips tighten into a thin line. Mr. Fisher tried to rattle me during cross-examination, suggesting my neighbors had manipulated me, that I was confused. But every answer I gave was sharp, precise. I recited account numbers, dates of payments, details of household management. If I was confused, I was the most detailed, confused woman they had ever seen. At the end of my testimony, Mr. Weber made his final move. He handed the judge the documents I had carried in my safe for months. Your Honor, I submit these records, which show that Mrs. Hartman legally transferred ownership of her home to the Elder Justice Foundation nearly a year ago. Far from being reckless, she acted with foresight to protect her assets from precisely the abuse we see here today. The effect was seismic. Murmurs exploded in the courtroom. Max's face drained of color. Lena leaned forward, her mouth opening in shock. They hadn't just lost their case, they had lost everything they thought they owned. The judge raised his gavel for silence. Order. He studied the documents for a long moment, then looked over his glasses at Max and Lena. It is the finding of this court that Mrs. Hartman is of sound mind, fully capable of managing her affairs. The petition for guardianship is denied in its entirety. Relief crashed over me like a wave, but it wasn't joy. It was justice. Then the judge delivered the final blow. Furthermore, the evidence presented suggests this case was motivated by financial interest, not genuine concern. Mr. Ipo and Mrs. Hartman, consider this a warning. Should further attempts of this nature occur, this court will not hesitate to involve criminal investigation into elder financial abuse. The gavel struck. The case was over. I stood, the strength in my legs surprising even me. Max finally met my eyes, and for a fleeting second, I saw regret flicker there. But it was too late. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a man who had chosen greed over love. Lena, on the other hand, gave me nothing but pure, seething hatred. As I left the courtroom, my neighbors, my lawyer, even strangers approached me with nods of respect. I had walked in as a victim. I walked out as a survivor. And for the first time in years, I felt something powerful surge through me. Freedom. When the gavel fell and the courtroom emptied, I thought the battle was over. But in truth, it had only just begun to echo. Word travels fast in small towns, faster still when scandal tastes of betrayal and money. By the time I reached my front porch that evening, the story had already outrun me. The first to knock was Mrs. Lang. She held her head high, a rare pride in her eyes. "Renata, I heard what happened. The whole street is talking. You were magnificent." I shook my head, still trembling with leftover adrenaline. I only told the truth. "Sometimes the truth needs someone brave enough to shout it," she said. "And today you did." Her words spread warmth through the cold that had lived in me for weeks. But the warmth didn't stop at her door. Within hours, other neighbors stopped by. Mr. Summer from the hardware store, Ethan, who had installed the security cameras, even the cashier from the pharmacy. Each of them told me the same thing. They had seen, they had suspected, and now they knew. "You're not alone anymore," Mr. Summer said, his calloused hand resting briefly on mine. "We'll stand by you." Their support meant more than they could ever know. For months I had felt invisible, dismissed as an old woman too fragile to matter. Now every nod, every word of solidarity lit a fire inside me. The lies that Max and Lena had woven so carefully were unraveling in front of the very people they had hoped to deceive. And the fire didn't stop with neighbors. At church that Sunday, whispers filled the pews, but they weren't about my supposed confusion anymore. They were about the court ruling, the foundation, the betrayal that had been laid bare. People who had once looked at me with pity now approached with respect. "Renata, we misjudged you," one parishioner admitted, her voice low but sincere. "We believe their words. I'm sorry." I nodded. The bitterness still lingering but softened by the recognition. Sometimes believing lies is easier than facing the truth. But the most powerful ripple came from the judge's warning. The phrase, elder financial abuse, carried weight, more than any personal insult could. It transformed my private struggle into a public issue. Newspapers picked up the story. first local, then regional. Headlines read, "Mother outsmarts son in property betrayal case." The words felt surreal, but they were no longer just mine. They belonged to anyone who had ever been used, dismissed, betrayed by the people they loved most. Letters began arriving in my mailbox. Not bills, not threats, letters from strangers. One from a widow in Ohio. "Your courage gave me the strength to finally cut off my son's endless demands. Thank you." Another from a man in Texas. "I didn't know how to name what was happening to me until I read your story. Elder financial abuse. You put a spotlight on it." Each letter was a flame, and together they lit up the darkness that had nearly consumed me. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It was a torch, and others were carrying it too. Even the authorities took notice. A detective visited one afternoon, polite but firm. "Mrs. Hartman, we've been receiving multiple reports of cases similar to yours. Your testimony could help others. Would you consider speaking at community forums?" I hesitated. The thought of standing in front of strangers, reliving my pain, seemed unbearable. But then I remembered the letters, the faces of neighbors who had once believed lies but now saw truth, and I realized silence was what had allowed Max and Lena to grow so bold. Speaking would be my weapon. "Yes," I told the detective. "I'll speak. I'll tell them everything." As I closed the door that night, I felt the house breathe differently. It wasn't just my fortress anymore. It was a beacon. They had tried to bury me, but instead they had planted me in the soil of something larger. My fight had become a warning, a shield, even a comfort to others. And that, perhaps, was the deepest revenge. Max and Lena had wanted my house, my money, my silence. Instead, they had given me a voice louder than ever. The storm that Max and Lena had unleashed did not end with the gavel. It followed them home, into their workplaces, into every room where their names were whispered. The same relatives who once repeated their lies now avoided them, unwilling to be seen siding with thieves. The same neighbors who once pitied me crossed the street when they walked by. It was as if the entire community had turned its back, reflecting back the betrayal they had inflicted on me. I heard pieces of their downfall not because I searched for them, but because stories have a way of finding ears eager for justice. Max had taken out loans in anticipation of the sale money, certain the house would be his prize. When the court revealed the truth, that the house belonged to a foundation and not even to me anymore, his creditors came calling. He scrambled, desperate, humiliated. Lena's parents, once so proud of their daughter's marriage, now shook their heads in quiet shame. "They ruined themselves," Mrs. Lang said one evening, standing at my fence. "You didn't even have to raise a hand. They dug their own grave." And she was right. The irony was sharp. The more they had tried to bury me, the deeper they had sunk themselves. But the aftermath wasn't just theirs, it was mine too. For weeks I had walked with a weight pressing on my shoulders, my steps heavy with fear. Now, when I stepped outside, I felt light. I went to the market not to hide behind lowered eyes, but to smile at people who nodded in respect. I sat in church not as a subject of gossip, but as a symbol of resilience. And inside the house, everything felt different. The walls that once closed in on me now stood as proof of my survival. Each photo frame, each piece of furniture no longer whispered betrayal. They hummed with victory. One afternoon, I gathered Robert's old albums and placed them on the table. For the first time in years, I looked through them without tears clouding my vision. There he was, standing tall in our garden, holding Max on his shoulders. There he was, laughing in the kitchen, his hand flour-dusted from kneading bread. "We made it, Robert," I whispered. "They tried to erase us, but we're still here, and I'm stronger than ever." The calls from Max and Lena dwindled, then stopped altogether. At first, I thought I might feel emptiness, a hollow silence where their voices had once been. But instead, I felt peace, a silence that was not loneliness, but liberation. I used that silence to fill my days with things I had long abandoned. I went back to painting, the brush gliding across the canvas like a forgotten friend. I joined Mrs. Lang and other neighbors for evening walks, the cool air wrapping around us as we talked about gardens and books instead of betrayals. I even reconnected with Diana more often, our phone calls filled with laughter rather than worry. Justice had been served, yes, but the true victory was reclaiming my life. Still, I couldn't deny the poetic justice that followed Max and Lena. Lena lost her job after her employer read about the case in the paper. Who wants to hire someone accused of manipulating their mother-in-law into homelessness? Max's friends drifted away, embarrassed by the scandal. They were left with debts, with shame, with each other. Perhaps one day they would learn from it, perhaps not. But it was no longer my burden to carry. People sometimes ask me if I regretted it all, cutting them off, taking them to court, exposing everything. My answer was always the same. I only regret that it took me so long. I should have stopped feeding their greed years ago. And the greatest irony? By losing them, I found myself. I no longer walked with the desperation of a mother trying to buy affection. I walked as a woman who had faced betrayal and stood taller for it. My story was no longer just mine. It belonged to everyone who had ever been silenced by family, used by loved ones, dismissed because of age. And in that belonging, I found something I thought I had lost forever: dignity. The first morning I woke without fear was the most ordinary morning of all. Sunlight streamed across my kitchen table, the same table where weeks earlier I had sat trembling, counting every dollar I'd lost to them. But now the light felt different. It didn't expose my shame. It illuminated my freedom. I brewed my coffee, sat down with my journal, and for the first time in years, I wrote not about bills or transfers or arguments. I wrote about plans. The house that had once been a battlefield was no longer a prison. I had chosen to let it go, transferring it to a foundation before they could ever sink their claws into it. That choice, once secret, had saved me. Now, as I walked through its halls, I no longer felt haunted. I felt proud. Every crack in the wall, every creak of the floorboard had witnessed my fight and my triumph. I visited Robert's grave a week later. The grass had grown tall, but I trimmed it back, set down fresh flowers, and sat beside the stone as if sitting beside him. "It's done," I whispered. "They tried to strip away everything we built, but I held on. Not for them, for us, for me." The wind stirred the branches above, and for a moment I felt his presence, not as a memory but as approval. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. The scars of betrayal don't vanish with a gavel strike, but I carried them differently now. They were no longer open wounds. They were medals, proof that I had survived, that I had chosen myself over the illusion of love bought with money. Neighbors still stopped me on walks. Strangers still wrote letters. Each time I felt a reminder that my story had become more than pain. It had become a warning, a shield for others. That, perhaps, was the greatest victory, turning betrayal into a lesson that could outlive me. As for Max and Lena, they became shadows in my life. I heard whispers now and then, debts unpaid, friends lost, opportunities slipping through their fingers, but I no longer cared. Their downfall was not my satisfaction. My satisfaction came from knowing that for once, my choices were mine, my dignity intact. Sometimes, at night, I still ask myself, when did I start confusing love with money? When did I start believing that giving endlessly was the same as being loved? I don't have the answer. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore, because now I know the truth. Love that must be purchased is not love at all. I sit by the window in the evenings, watching the sun set over the garden Robert planted, and I breathe deeply. The silence no longer terrifies me. It comforts me, because it is mine. So if you're listening to my story now, I ask you, what would you do if the people you loved most betrayed you for money? Would you keep paying, keep bleeding yourself dry just to hold on to their presence? Or would you choose what I finally chose, the dignity of standing alone rather than kneeling for counterfeit love? I lost a son, yes, but in that loss, I found myself, and I discovered something I wish I had known sooner. True love has no price, and dignity is worth more than any house, any inheritance, any illusion. If my story has touched you, tell me, have you ever felt used by the people who should have cherished you? Leave your thoughts below. I want to hear them. Because stories like mine are not rare. They are everywhere, waiting for someone brave enough to speak. And if you believe dignity is worth defending, then don't just listen. Share this story. Like it. Subscribe. Because together, maybe we can remind the world of one truth they've tried too hard to forget. Love cannot be bought, and freedom is never too expensive.